passing of America's 41st president, George Herbert Walker Bush, has led to an outpouring of honors and respect being paid. RT's Caleb Maupin looks at whether the assessment of his time in office may have been tempered somewhat by the current political climate.
So, the sun has set on George Herbert Walker Bush, the 41st President of the United States. There has been, understandably, an outpouring of grief from his friends and family and many voices in the media.
He pursued a life of extraordinary service to America.
Such a man, so thoroughly decent, so moderate in his beliefs.
Model of what a public servant should be.
However, it seems that the media is glossing over certain aspects of Bush's legacy. It follows a pattern similar to the death of John McCain, where the media heaps praise onto an individual and highlights one particular character quality above all else: opposition to Donald Trump.
Publicly contentious relationship between Donald Trump and George H.W. Bush.
He didn't vote for him in 2016.
He said that he thought Donald Trump had, quote, a certain ego. And then he told you point blank,
he's a blowhard. Oh. He's a blowhard.
He was an oil tycoon and a CIA chief who eventually became president. His record wasn't spotless. Now, we all know that Donald Trump never apologizes. Well, after the United States shot down an Iranian airliner and killed 290 civilians, we'll remember this classic Trump-esque line that we heard from President Bush.
I'll never apologize for the United States of America. Ever. I don't care what the facts are.
Now, the media hails the first war on Iraq as one of his shining moments.
As was the case in the 1930s, we see in Saddam Hussein an aggressive dictator threatening his neighbors.
Now, Bush compared Saddam Hussein to Adolf Hitler. He said that the bombs had to fall. As a result of the Gulf War, thousands of civilians died. He was also a big supporter of another war, that being the war on drugs.
This is crack cocaine, seized a few days ago by drug enforcement agents in a park just across the street from the White House.
Well, it turns out that the Drug Enforcement Agency actually lured the dealer to the White House so that this point could be made. Now, Bush called for harsher penalties, lock them up, longer prison sentences. 30 years later, we've got the biggest prison population in the world in the United States, but the drug crisis has spiraled out of control. H.W. died shortly after the rise of Me Too, and many women came forward at that time saying that he had certain proclivities.
He reached his hand around and said to the group, do you know who my favorite magician is? And we all said, no, who? And he said, David Copperfield. And at that moment, I felt him grab my behind.
Now, the former president acknowledged that some of these allegations were true, but he said that the, quote, patting of women's rears was intended to be good-natured. So, American mainstream media has mourned the passing of George Herbert Walker Bush, much like it mourns the passing of other former leaders. However, it seems that American media has a bit of a selective memory, especially if you don't like Donald Trump. Caleb Maupin, RT, New York.
With George H.W. Bush in question, we're joined by a panel: investigative journalist Ben Swann and chairman of the Committee to Defend the President, Ted Harvey. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
So, Ted, let's talk about Bush Sr.'s relationship with President Trump. Even though he attended the funeral, why is it such a hot topic for the mainstream media right now?
Well, I think it says more about the mainstream media and their desire to go after the president, even when the Bush family is celebrating the patriarch's life and when the nation is mourning his loss. I think the fact that the media continues to dwell in the middle of this memorial about a relationship between two individuals, that speaks more about them and their character than it does about the former president's character and how he has served this country and sacrificed so much for this country.
Interesting. And Ben, we know Bush passed away just days ago. Do you think it's too early to talk about what Bush didn't do right?
No, I not only do I not think it's too early to talk about it, I think we should have already been talking about it. One of the problems with our media is that they choose to selectively talk about certain issues, and then when someone passes that's high profile, like former President Bush or Senator John McCain, who recently passed, we gloss over a lot of their record. You know, the idea that President Trump is this monster. Meanwhile, President Bush was a dove. That's the term that's being used for him, a dove. He wasn't a dove, and he certainly wasn't a man of peace. He was certainly a very tempered person in public life. But in terms of his policies, he was not a man of peace.
And Ted, the report that we just watched touches on, Bush's disdain for Saddam Hussein. Is that something that you think most Americans look back and applaud still today?
Well, historically, you have to understand the situation that the country was in and the world was in. Saddam Hussein had invaded one of his neighboring countries. The world united around George Bush's leadership to expel Saddam from Kuwait, and the world celebrated that. The American public celebrated that. And once he was pushed out and pushed back inside his boundaries, the war stopped. He did not continue. He was not some out of control war hawk like your guest just argued. He was somebody who wanted to have peace and wanted to make sure that the Middle East was secure and that we weren't having countries invading each other over there.
And Ben, what about the war on drugs? Do you think Bush made an effort to put an end to it, or do you think there was corruption all the way to the top?
Well, there's definitely corruption. And by the way, I didn't say he was a war hawk. I said that he was not a man of peace. But beyond that, let's talk about the drug issue. Bush ran the CIA for many years. He was supposed to be cleaning it up, and most media are referring to him as a reformer. And in some ways, he did reform the CIA. But the new CIA that he set into place was involved in drug trafficking into Miami. We know that was helping to dispose governments in South America and Central America. We know that. And even as the report that was leading up to this segment, we know that this war on drugs, specifically on crack cocaine, a lot of this was manufactured in terms of how this war was conducted. So look, the bottom line is that a lot of these policies that were put into place, we look back now 30 years later at a lot of what's happened since that time, and the result of the war on drugs, terrible. And by the way, the war in the Middle East, every single war that we've seen since then, Iraq, Libya, Syria, all that's going on right now was started with the Persian Gulf War back in 1990 and 1991.
And quickly, Ted, these so-called Me Too claims against Bush, do you think they were blown out of proportion, or do you think they were legitimate claims?
I'm sorry, I wasn't following the question.
Could you hear the report in your ear? I don't know if you could hear that before the segment. The report touched on Me Too claims against the president.
Oh, yeah.
President Bush.
Yeah. I really don't have much to say about that. I wasn't there. I don't know exactly what the situation was. He certainly was getting up in age, and I'm not sure what the situation was there, but I don't want to comment on that.
Yeah, certainly. Well, thank you so much, gentlemen, for your insights. Really appreciate it. Ben Swann and Ted Harvey. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Hey YouTube, thanks for checking out our channel. We hope you enjoyed the video. We have tons of content for you just like this. For more of RT America's one-of-a-kind news and analysis, be sure to subscribe and never stop questioning more.